Clara had always been the quiet presence in the company, the one who slipped into meetings without being noticed and left without being remembered. She was never the loudest voice in the room, never the one shaking hands with investors or dazzling clients with rehearsed pitches. Instead, she lived in the background, tucked away in the world of contracts, approvals, and compliance reports. Her desk was always piled with files, her screen always filled with lines of text that others barely skimmed. People called her meticulous, sometimes obsessive, but rarely important. In truth, Clara's work was the skeleton of the company. She held the records of every deal, every contract clause, every approval form that others signed without reading. She was the invisible thread keeping the entire structure intact. But nobody saw her that way. For years, the executives referred to her half-jokingly as the paper pusher. They laughed at her attention to detail, dismissed her cautious warnings, and overlooked her constant reminders about legal obligations. Clara learned to accept it. She didn't crave the spotlight. She told herself that invisibility had its advantages. People underestimated her, and that gave her freedom to observe, to collect, to know. But everything began to change when the new leadership arrived. A new CEO was appointed, a man who thrived on speed and bold promises. He called meetings full of buzzwords: efficiency, disruption, fast-tracking. The new management didn't want slow reviews or long compliance reports. They wanted signatures, quick approvals, and shortcuts. Clara tried to warn them. She pointed out the legal risks of rushing contracts and skipping due diligence. She highlighted the small print that could lead to lawsuits. Her words fell flat. "We don't need bureaucracy slowing us down," the CEO told her in front of the entire board. "Our future isn't in paperwork, it's in momentum." The room laughed politely, and Clara's voice dissolved into silence. Within weeks, she was excluded from meetings. Her name disappeared from email chains. Her access to decision-making systems was cut. The message was clear. She was no longer wanted. And then came the official notice. HR summoned her one morning with a neatly printed letter, polite but cold. Her role was being eliminated. They called it restructuring, but Clara knew it was dismissal, nothing more. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She signed the document with steady hands and returned to her desk. Around her, no one looked up. No one asked if she was all right. To them, she was already gone, a ghost fading out of the office. But Clara wasn't leaving empty-handed. On her last day, she quietly opened her private archive, a collection she had built over years. Every contract she had reviewed, every red flag she had raised, every discrepancy she had discovered but been ignored for. She had kept copies of it all. Documents others had buried were preserved in neat folders, each labeled and time-stamped. She knew where every skeleton was hidden. She plugged in a small encrypted USB drive and began transferring the files. Hundreds of contracts, emails with signatures, records of approvals that violated regulations, reports that had been dismissed as irrelevant. Clara compressed it all into one final package and saved it under a simple name: Prepared by Clara. She ejected the drive, slipped it into her bag, and shut down her computer. No one noticed. As she walked out of the building for the last time, Clara paused at the entrance. She looked back at the glass tower gleaming in the late afternoon light. To everyone inside, it was a monument to ambition and success. To her, it was a house of cards, fragile and waiting for the right push. She whispered under her breath, "You thought I was invisible. One day, you'll see me more clearly than anyone else." The weeks that followed seemed ordinary on the surface. The company raced ahead with new deals. The executives boasted to the press about growth, and no one mentioned Clara's absence. But beneath that calm surface, something was moving. Regulators suddenly began reviewing old filings. Anonymous reports arrived on their desks, full of suspicious discrepancies. Deals that had been rushed without oversight now looked questionable. 2 weeks after Clara's exit, chaos erupted. The CEO arrived at the office one morning to find a flood of calls from the legal department. A government agency had launched a formal investigation. Contracts they thought were buried had resurfaced, each one containing clauses that could bankrupt them. At an emergency board meeting, voices clashed. Some executives swore they had never seen the documents regulators now held. Others insisted Clara must have filed them incorrectly. The CEO slammed his fist on the table. "These are leaks," he growled. Somebody handed them over. But who? As the board argued, the CEO's laptop pinged with a new email. He clicked it without thinking. The subject line was short and sharp. You never saw me, but I always saw you. The sender's name froze him in place. Clara, the Watcher. The CEO's eyes froze on the screen. The room was still buzzing with arguments, board members throwing accusations back and forth, but his attention was locked on those words. You never saw me, but I always saw you. For a moment, he thought it was a prank. Some hacker, maybe, spoofing an old employee's name. But the timing was too precise, too sharp. The regulators had just launched an investigation, and here was Clara's name appearing like a ghost from the past. He closed the laptop quickly, but not before one of the board members noticed the expression on his face. What is it? Someone asked. He shook his head. Nothing. Just spam. Yet his hands were trembling. That night, long after the building had emptied, he reopened the email. There was no attachment, no threat. Just a single sentence beneath the subject line. This is only the beginning. The next morning, the investigation widened. Regulators requested copies of past agreements with a major client. The legal team scrambled to comply. But when they pulled the files from the central archive, they found versions that looked incomplete. Key clauses were missing. Signatures looked different. The regulators, however, already had full versions that revealed hidden penalties and illegal concessions. The CEO demanded answers from the legal department. How had these versions slipped out? Why did the regulators have copies the company didn't? Nobody could explain it. Documents Clara had once flagged for review were resurfacing now, exactly where they could do the most damage. At first, the executives told themselves it was coincidence. Clara was gone. She couldn't possibly still be influencing events. But then came the second email. It arrived late in the evening, sent not just to the CEO but to every member of the board. The subject line was a date from 2 years ago, one none of them recognized at first. Inside was a scanned contract, marked with signatures, including the CEO's own. Below it, a single line of text. You called it momentum. I called it malpractice. The board fell silent. They remembered that deal now, a rushed partnership sealed in a late-night meeting against Clara's explicit warnings. She had begged them to slow down, to read the clauses. They had laughed her out of the room. And now, here it was, in their inboxes, undeniable, damning. The CEO tried to contain the panic. He told them it was nothing more than an old employee trying to stir trouble. But when one of the board members pointed out that the regulators had already asked for the same contract that very morning, even he felt the blood drain from his face. Clara's name was never spoken aloud in those meetings, as if saying it might summon her ghost. But every man and woman in that boardroom began to feel her presence. She was no longer invisible. She was everywhere. Meanwhile, Clara watched from a distance. She lived quietly in a small apartment far from the city center, her days outwardly uneventful. But every evening she opened her laptop, connected her encrypted drive, and chose the next piece of evidence to release. She didn't move quickly. She didn't flood them with everything at once. Instead, she peeled back the layers slowly, methodically, the way she had once reviewed contracts. Each document was a blade, sharp and deliberate. She remembered the humiliation of that last meeting, the way they had brushed aside her words, the laughter that had followed her warnings. She replayed those moments as she typed. They had dismissed her because she was quiet, because she didn't shout or demand attention. Now her silence was louder than any of their voices. Weeks passed, and the company's confidence began to crack. Shareholders demanded explanations. Clients hesitated to renew contracts, worried about legal entanglements. Journalists caught wind of the investigation and began circling like vultures. Inside the office, paranoia grew. Executives accused each other of leaking files. Teams were instructed to audit every document, but the deeper they dug, the more irregularities they found. In a private call, the CEO raged to his closest advisors. "She's doing this," he snapped. "I don't know how, but it's her. Clara." His advisors hesitated. "Sir, with respect, she was just a compliance officer. She didn't have that kind of access." The CEO's voice dropped. "You don't understand. She didn't need access. She was access. Every deal, every contract, every loophole. We handed it to her ourselves. That night, he received a third email. No attachments this time, just a photograph. It was a picture of the company's gleaming headquarters, taken from across the street. The lights in the top floors were still burning. Beneath the photo, one line read, "I still see you." The CEO's hand shook as he closed the laptop. For the first time, he felt it. Not just fear of exposure, but fear of someone watching, waiting. Clara was gone, yet she was closer than ever. And Clara, sitting miles away in her apartment, allowed herself a thin smile. This was only the second step. She wasn't finished. Not yet. The investigation tightened its grip like a noose. Regulators demanded access not just to contracts, but to internal communications, archived emails, and financial ledgers. What had begun as a single inquiry into one suspicious deal now sprawled into a full-scale audit. The company's executives, once so confident, were spending sleepless nights combing through files, terrified of what might surface next. Every morning, new leaks appeared in the press. Articles with damning details, dates, signatures, conversations that should never have seen daylight, filled the business pages. Journalists quoted anonymous sources close to the matter, but inside the boardroom they all knew the truth. The ghost of Clara was pulling the strings. The CEO became increasingly erratic. He snapped at his staff, fired managers at random, and demanded loyalty pledges from his closest advisors. Whispers spread through the office corridors. Some employees claimed to have seen strange emails land in their inboxes, old memos from years ago, resurfacing with Clara's initials attached. Most dismissed them as rumors, but the paranoia grew. Then came the night of the blackout. It was a Friday evening, the headquarters nearly empty except for a skeleton crew in the finance department. Without warning, the internal servers crashed. Monitors went black, alarms blared, and the emergency lights flickered on. The IT team scrambled, believing it to be a technical fault, but within minutes they discovered something chilling. Files were not merely inaccessible, they were gone. Entire folders had vanished from the shared drives, leaving only a single message on the central server. You trusted shadows more than the truth. Now the shadows are all you have. When word reached the CEO, he locked himself in his office. He knew it was her. Nobody else could leave a message so precise, so pointed. Clara had been the custodian of those very files, the one who ensured nothing slipped through the cracks. And now she was proving that even in absence, she still held them. The board convened an emergency meeting the next morning. Tension hung heavy in the room. Half the executives argued that Clara must have stolen data before her departure. The other half feared something worse, that she still had access somehow. No theory made them feel safer. "Find her," the CEO demanded. His voice was hoarse, his face drawn from lack of sleep. "I don't care how. Hire investigators. Track her down. If she wants a fight, we'll bring it to her doorstep." But Clara was not so easily found. She had erased her tracks long before the company realized she was a threat. The investigators reported back with nothing but dead ends. No new employment records. No trace of her movements. It was as if she had dissolved into the very shadows she spoke of. Meanwhile, the leaks intensified. Regulators received entire chains of emails between the CEO and board members, exposing deliberate decisions to bypass compliance safeguards. Investors began pulling their funds, fearing collapse. The company's stock price plummeted. What had once been a shining tower of success now looked like a crumbling fortress under siege. Clara watched the unraveling with cold precision. She was not reckless. Every disclosure was timed to cause maximum damage. First the contracts, then the internal communications, and now the financial irregularities. Piece by piece, she dismantled the image the company had built. Each revelation drove another wedge between the executives, until they could no longer trust one another. One evening, as the CEO sat alone in his office, a new email arrived. His hand hovered above the mouse, hesitant to open it, but curiosity overcame fear. The subject line was simple. "Do you remember the night you laughed?" Inside, there was no attachment, only a transcript of a boardroom conversation from 2 years ago. Clara's voice, quiet but firm, had warned them about a contract clause. The CEO's reply had been dismissive, followed by laughter from the others. Reading the words now, in stark black and white, he felt the heat rise in his face. She had remembered every detail, and now she was forcing him to remember it too. His hands trembled as he shut the laptop. For the first time, he realized the truth. Clara didn't just want justice. She wanted memory. She wanted them to relive every moment they had dismissed her, every insult, every time they had chosen arrogance over caution. She wasn't simply destroying the company. She was making them feel it, and she was far from finished. The walls of the company were closing in. Every day brought another blow, an expose in the press, a demand from regulators, a call from furious investors. Executives who once strutted confidently through the glass halls now moved like hunted men, their eyes darting, their voices hushed. Clara's presence, though unseen, was everywhere. The CEO had grown paranoid beyond reason. He stopped using company email entirely, switching to burner phones and encrypted apps. But even then, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was listening. He had nightmares in which Clara appeared silently behind him, holding stacks of contracts like weapons. He woke drenched in sweat, unsure if he was losing his mind. Then came the financial freeze. One Monday morning, the accounting team reported that several offshore accounts, long used to funnel questionable payments, had been locked by authorities. Someone had provided regulators with exact routing numbers, account details, even the passwords. The CEO knew instantly, Clara. Only she had kept such meticulous records. He raged through the office, slamming doors, demanding answers. "She's dismantling us piece by piece," he shouted. "Don't you see? She's not just after exposure, she's after annihilation." The board, fractured and terrified, began to turn against him. Whispers spread that maybe he was the real liability now, that his arrogance had drawn Clara's wrath. One director even suggested resigning en masse to save themselves. The CEO silenced him with a glare, but the cracks were visible. Meanwhile, Clara worked patiently from the shadows. Each night she chose her next strike carefully, her small apartment lit only by the glow of her laptop. She remembered every slight, every dismissal, every condescending smile. And with each revelation, she turned those memories into weapons. But she also knew timing was everything. Destroying them too quickly would be mercy. She wanted them to feel every step of the collapse. So when she leaked the records of bribery payments to a journalist, she waited until the company's largest annual conference. The story broke just as the CEO took the stage, reporters' phones buzzing in unison. Cameras flashed, questions were shouted, and within minutes the broadcast turned from celebration to humiliation. That night, the CEO returned to his penthouse and found an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of his own signature on an illicit deal, dated 3 years ago. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were the words, "You ignored my voice then. Can you ignore it now?" His fury turned to desperation. He ordered private investigators to trace Clara's digital footprint. They scoured servers, monitored traffic, even tried to bait her with fake leaks. But Clara was always a step ahead. Every trap they set was dismantled before it closed, as if she could see through their plans. In truth, Clara knew them too well. She anticipated their moves because she had spent years inside those walls, understanding their rhythms, their shortcuts, their weaknesses. They had taught her everything she needed to dismantle them. Weeks later, the company's share price collapsed entirely, wiped out by scandal and lawsuits. Employees fled, clients severed ties, and creditors circled like wolves. Still, Clara did not stop. One evening, as the CEO sat alone in his office, his empire crumbling around him, his phone buzzed with a new message. No sender, no subject line. Just 3 words, "Do you remember?" Attached was a short audio file. He pressed play. It was his own voice, laughing, mocking Clara in that long-ago board meeting. Around him, other voices joined, directors snickering, dismissing her warnings. The sound filled the room, echoing like a curse. The CEO slammed the phone down, but the laughter kept playing in his head. He realized Clara wasn't only destroying the company's records, she was resurrecting their past. Every careless word, every arrogant chuckle, every insult they had buried was now a weapon against them. The company, once untouchable, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. And Clara, unseen and unheard, was waiting for the perfect moment to deliver her final blow. The company was a carcass now, its glass towers still gleaming under the sun but hollow inside. Lawsuits piled up in every court. Regulators froze the last of the accounts. The board resigned one by one, each trying to escape the wreckage, each whispering Clara's name like a curse. Employees scattered, looking for safer ground, leaving behind empty cubicles and half-packed boxes. At the center of it all, the CEO sat alone in his office. His empire was gone, stripped layer by layer. Not by a competitor, not by the market, but by a woman he had once dismissed with a smirk. He stared at the skyline, but instead of the glittering city he once conquered, he saw only shadows. That evening, the final message arrived. His laptop chimed softly, as though mocking his fear. He hesitated, but his curiosity betrayed him. The subject line read simply, "The Last Record." He clicked. On the screen appeared a video. At first static, then an image resolved. Clara sitting in the same boardroom from years ago. The footage was grainy, pulled from an old security camera. She was speaking, calm and clear, explaining the risks in the contract they were about to sign. Her words were methodical, precise, filled with the warnings they had all chosen to ignore. The camera panned slightly, capturing the CEO himself, leaning back in his chair, laughing. Around the table, the board members chuckled, shaking their heads. Clara's voice grew fainter as theirs drowned her out. Then the video froze on her face. Calm, silent, her eyes steady. Beneath the image, a line of text appeared. "I was invisible then. I am unforgettable now." The CEO's chest tightened. He slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. The message had already spread. Within hours, the video surfaced online. Journalists played it on loop, highlighting the arrogance of leadership, the precision of Clara's warnings, and the haunting silence that followed her words. The world now saw what the company had ignored for years. Clara had been the conscience they buried, the truth they silenced. And now, her truth was everywhere. By morning, the company's stock hit zero. Creditors filed for liquidation. The once mighty giant collapsed, not with a sudden explosion, but with a slow, inevitable fall, orchestrated by the woman they had erased. Far from the chaos, Clara watched the news from her quiet apartment. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. Justice had never been about applause. It had been about memory, about forcing them to see what they had refused to see. Her work was done. She stood by the window, watching the city lights blink in the distance. For years, she had been invisible. Now, her story was etched into the ruins of a fallen empire. But Clara left one final message, not for the CEO, not for the board, but for everyone else. On a simple website, plain black text on a white background, she wrote, "Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never ignore the warnings of those who see what you refuse to see. Power built on arrogance will always collapse. Remember, Clara. Remember the invisible." And at the bottom, a final line pulsed like a heartbeat. "If you've ever been silenced, know this. Your voice is not gone. It's waiting. Use it.